Hi, Facebook. This is Alex Gibson. I am the digital engagement editor at Eurasia Group, and I am here in our beautiful Washington, D.C. office. You want to show them a little bit of this is maybe my favorite hallway, but there are many. And we're here to talk with our D.C.-based analysts about what tomorrow, Donald Trump's inauguration, means for the world, and specifically some of the countries that our experts spend every day talking about. So without further ado, let's start touring the office and hear from some of the experts themselves. So we're going to start off over here on our Latin America team with Chris Garman, who is the Managing Director of Research at Eurasia Group, heads up our Brazil practice, and is a Latin American expert, all things Latin America. So let's talk Mexico. What can we expect after so much buildup between the president-elect and our neighbor to the south?
Yes. Well, listen, I think that the concern in Mexico City and the Trump administration is running very high, and for good reason. Trump's election in his administration is probably bad news for Mexico on two fronts. In the short term, we should expect the Trump administration to follow through on some of his campaign promises, which really put the blame on job losses in the U.S. on both Mexico and China. So a renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement is in the cards. That process will be long. It'll generate a lot of uncertainty and could also generate and stymie some investments in Mexico in the short term. But the larger repercussion of the Trump administration may very well be looking at 2018 when we have presidential elections and the leftist Manuel López Obrador may very well gain with all the bluster coming out of Mexico. The silver lining, of course, is that when we look at the Trump administration, we think that the administration is more focused and intent on directing their trade efforts against China and less against Mexico. So a deal probably will be had on NAFTA, which at the end of the day won't be so bad for Mexico. But again, the larger cost will probably come on the uncertainty before we actually know what that end game will actually be. So some rough road ahead here for Mexico, for sure, over the next year.
Thanks, Chris. Lots to look forward to. And apologies, I messed up your most important title, which I believe is Best Dad Ever. As you can see, it's got some gorgeous wall art over there. We're people, too, here at Eurasia Group. We are people, too. Thanks, Chris. All right, we're going to keep going. This is our wonderful editorial division. They keep us honest. And we're going to go to my second favorite hallway, and Divya Reddy, who is our practice head for energy, global energy issues, from here to Saudi Arabia, everywhere in between. Divya, our top risk this year was independent America, right? It was the idea that we're going to withdraw from the world in many respects. What does that mean for energy? What does that mean for energy markets and for some of our allies around the world?
I think the U.S. has generally played a stabilizing role in a lot of energy-producing areas, most notably the Middle East, and a withdrawal of U.S. leadership in some of these areas could result in increased instability in the Middle East in particular that could have spillover implications for oil markets and create more volatility around oil markets. In other areas like Russia, potentially a softening of relations between the U.S. and Russia might help the prospects for lifting sanctions on Russian energy production, and that could result in increased opportunities for the Russian sector.
And it hasn't been a particularly good year for OPEC. What does 2017 hold for them and a Trump administration?
Yeah, I think the limitation for OPEC to sort of manage the market the way they used to is that U.S. shale production has had such an outsized role that even if OPEC were to cut production, U.S. producers can produce as much as they want, and that could be an offsetting factor. In 2017, it's probably a little irrespective of Trump, but we do think that there will be a slow recovery in the U.S. production profile, and that will mitigate the impact of the OPEC production cuts. Now, Trump is promised to be very favorable for the U.S. oil and gas sector, and I think sentiment-wise that will have an impact. But in terms of real tangible ways to lower costs for U.S. producers, there's probably not that many.
Okay, well, somewhat of a silver lining then, I suppose. Thanks so much, Divya. Okay, now we're going to move away from energy and focus a little bit more on Eurasia, which, half of the name we should at least have one expert on it. And I'm joined now by, believe your title is senior analyst, Mr. Zachary Whitland. How are you doing today? So we're one day away from inauguration. There's a man in Moscow who thinks quite fondly of our president-elect. I think Putin, something like Putin. Okay. What can you offer that we haven't already discussed on the issue? What can we expect in this dynamic? What's going to surprise you?
I think there's going to be plenty of surprises going forward. I think the first one is going to be what exactly Trump's attempt at a so-called reset would actually look like the first time that he meets with Vladimir Putin. Maybe that'll be the first foreign trip. Maybe it won't be. Quite a bit is unclear right now, including who's actually going to be handling Russia policy in the next administration right here. What I think we should expect is that there will be in a dialogue, some kind of attempt at engagement. We are expecting some degree of sanctions relief, one that may not necessarily be tied to progress implementing the peace process over Ukraine right here. But what happens after that is much less certain. And if I had to take a guess right now, I'd say that there's hard limits to what any kind of reset would actually achieve, and I think pretty low ceiling for how far any kind of improvement in U.S.-Russian relations could go. It's easy to get a symbolic victory. It's easy to sell it on cameras with a nice handshake and two manly men sitting next to each other. But beyond that, I don't know.
Now, I hate to put you on the spot here, but speaking of manly men, my just parting question here. We've seen shirtless Putin. Can we expect a shirtless Trump?
You know,
all right, we're going to leave it right there. Thanks so much. Appreciate the contribution. That scream was from our chairman, Cliff Kupchin. Cliff always provides ample entertainment here in the office. So now we're going to move over to one of our newest additions here at Eurasia Group. This is Amaka. Amaka joins us from, where were you from before Eurasia Group?
Strategic Research Advisory Firm.
Okay, well, we're very happy to have you on board here. So, West Africa. What can we expect? Probably one of the reasons that people are talking about least right now, depending on the conversation, of course. I don't mean to make generalizations. But is Trump's inauguration a happy day for some of the leaders in West Africa, or what can you speak to?
Well, I think for most of Africa, and particularly West Africa, there's a lot of uncertainty about what Trump means for the continent and for major U.S. initiatives under the Obama administration. We really have no good sense, except for that we know that they will oppose jihadist movements, which is a big deal in Nigeria. But it remains to be seen just how interventionist they will be. Most analysts are watching to see who will be chosen as the Assistant Secretary for Africa. One big area of concern, though, is Power Africa, which
Power Africa?
Power Africa. It's an initiative that was launched by the Obama administration to encourage U.S. investment in electricity generation across the continent. And the biggest sort of problem with that is that congressional Republicans are opposed to Exim Bank, which is scheduled to release most of the financing for the program. And they have refused to appoint a board to enable Exim Bank actually sign off on significant loans to U.S. companies. So we are cautiously optimistic that the administration will recognize that this initiative helps U.S. companies, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Margaret. Right, we're going to move back now a little closer to home. Home for us here in D.C. being the United States, but we're a global company. We're all around the world. Ian Bremer would want me to say that, and I agree with it, so we'll leave it there. John Lieber, U.S. expert on all things, a lot of things. We'll stick with politics for right now.
Brownies later, I guess.
Yeah. No, I have time on our calendar for that. So, a lot happening in D.C. today and tomorrow. What can we expect? What can we expect from a Trump administration, say, in the first 100 days or 100 hours? That's not the question we prepped. I just forgot what it was.
A lot of uncertainty in the first 100 days and the first 100 hours. I think that this is a team that's been planning for months now to really hit the ground running. In particular, they want to start undoing pieces of the Obama agenda. President Obama being unable to get things through Congress, ended up passing a lot of things through executive orders and through executive action and regulation. And Trump's going to move really quickly to undo pieces of that on immigration, on trade, on a couple other fronts. So I think that's going to be the early agenda items. Legislatively, I think their number one item is going to be repealing the Affordable Care Act, which looks, there's some hand-wringing going on in Congress right now. But ultimately, I think that they probably repeal the thing, and then we see a long 3-year process or so of them trying to put in place new pieces to replace it.
And related to that, one thing everyone who lives in D.C. knows is that the construction around Inauguration Day on the Capitol is always a big deal. There's always a lot going up. So in that same vein, if it's been this kind of a process just to get inauguration going, how much can we look forward to the wall that we're going to build on our southern border?
That's an interesting analogy.
It took a little while to get there.
Yeah, I mean, so the inauguration and the wall are both not new. So we've had inaugurations every 4 years. They're used to putting up all the bunting and the risers and everything else. And the wall's been in process for quite some time. President Bush got authority to build, I think it was, whatever it is, thousands of miles of fencing on the southern border in the second half of his administration. And, President Trump now just needs to get the funding to do so. I expect he's going to get some funds from Congress that'll help go towards, border guards, dogs, fencing, helicopters, whatever it is that helps protect the southern border. But there's not going to be a big, beautiful wall. I think that's probably a bridge too far and really unnecessary.
Bridge too far for a beautiful wall. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about geotechnology here. It's one of the fastest growing areas, I think, in terms of our not in our investment here at Eurasia Group and interest both in the U.S. and around the world. So with that, this is Paul Triolo, sporting a very appropriate Stanford fleece. Paul, let's talk hacking.
So I think going forward, they're going to be the emphasis on the Russian hacking probe, for example, is going to shift to the Congress. There are 3 committees now looking at this. There will also be an interagency investigation within the administration, but we think that the Trump administration will maintain that the hacking didn't really change the outcome of the elections. So this is it's going to be an ongoing issue. Probably we're going to be hearing about new revelations on this for months. But I think it'll come and go. I think we've already seen most of the details that have come out, and so I think there may be a few surprises, but I don't expect a whole lot going forward.
Okay. And self-driving cars. Just kidding. You don't have to speak to that.
That's good. There's been a lot of talk about self-driving cars. There are a lot of truck driving jobs in the U.S. And I think the issue is complicated because one camp will tell you we're just years away or less than years away from self-driving cars. I think there'll be a few use cases like truck fleets and things, but I think we're still a ways away from because of regulatory and other hurdles and actually perfecting some of the automation, the AI there. But I think we could be surprised that in a few limited areas we could see something sooner.
Self-driving airplanes?
No. Well, they already are largely self-driving. The pilot doesn't have to do a lot.
Okay, well, very hot take there on pilots from Paul Triolo. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Lots of interesting stuff coming out of his area of expertise. Okay, we're going to pivot to Asia, if you will, and speak to another one of our newest analysts. This is Shailesh Kumar, joining us from Treasury Department. Very happy to have him here. Shailesh, let's talk Modi. Trump, Modi, that dynamic. What can we expect?
I think that Trump and Modi are going to have, they're going to try to deepen their relationship. There's going to be a natural kinship between the two that's going to help lend itself to closer U.S.-India relations. Part of it's due to the fact that Trump had some members of the Indian American community who were critical or helpful in his campaign. And these same members have a close relationship with Modi. They helped introduce him when he was the chief minister of Gujarat to members of the U.S. Congress. So I think that's going to play a role. I also think that both leaders have a very similar worldview. Modi, like Trump, considers terrorism as one of the greatest threats to his country. He also is wary of China. So to that end, you're probably going to see Modi try to develop a closer strategic relationship with America, build upon his strategy of interdependence, and also increase the purchase of U.S. weapons.
Okay, well, I apologize also. It was very rude of me not to introduce your colleague, who happens to be standing right next to me. This is Sasha Reiser-Kaczynski, also an expert on the region, India in particular. So Shailesh is talking about the similarities between Modi and Trump. Are there a lot of Make America Great Again hats in India right now, or does this affinity end at the highest levels?
I haven't seen any hats running around in Delhi, at least thus far. But what I can say, one of the potential flashpoints or areas of tension in the relationship are going to be, Trump's statements around restricting immigration, taking a critical look at outsourcing, and the use of H-1Bs, which are a big part of a lot of Indian technology companies' business models at the moment. But I think Shailesh and I would argue, though, that this is going to be a lesser issue in the relationship than the drivers on the security and defense side that are bringing the two countries closer together are going to outweigh the forces driving them apart on the immigration side in particular.
Okay, so moderately optimistic outlook in this dynamic going forward. That's something to keep an eye on in the days and weeks ahead. Thanks to both of you on the India team. Now we're going to move a bit further east and head over to the Koreas and Japan with our expert on that region, Mr. Scott Seaman. Scott, Shinzo Abe, one of the first people to reach out to Trump after the shocking results, shocking to some people, maybe not to him. What can we expect out of that dynamic and about U.S. relationship with Japan in the coming year?
You're definitely right that Abe took the initiative right away and made sure that he arrived in New York shortly after the election and sat down with Trump and I think members of Trump's family. And I know that the government in Japan is trying to arrange another kind of a mini summit, perhaps shortly after the inauguration, to give them a chance again to talk more at length. So Abe certainly wants to keep a good relationship with the U.S. It's critical to Japan's security and defense and economic policies throughout the region. So I think on balance, both sides will be happy to continue working together as close allies. But I would say that there is concern in Japan that perhaps Trump will not be as interested in playing a major role in kind of leading the charge on security issues in Asia. And North Korea in particular is something that Japan feels that it needs as much help as it can get.
Okay, well, we'll see how all of that plays out. Thank you so much, Scott. And finally, I would like to bring in Meredith Sumter, who is our director of, I believe, Southeast Asia or maybe Asia at large, and a China expert. Thanks for closing things out with us, Meredith. So, Xi and Donald, or Mr. President Trump, as I should say, I apologize. A strained relationship already. Is that something that we can expect to become even more strained over the coming months, or is there cause for hope?
Well, I think hope is sort of a strong word, at least for this first year in the administration. But this is actually a really important time. And people are wondering, is this going to be a meltdown situation? And we don't necessarily think that it will be meltdown. Will there be increased turbulence? Absolutely. Mr. Trump comes to this relationship with a view that China has been unfair in how it treats U.S. firms and how it implements trade policies. And he is looking to take actions that is meant to change Chinese behavior. Now, we've seen this in past U.S. administrations, most recently the Clinton administration, the Reagan administration. The first couple years tends to be pretty combative as the new U.S. team tries different policy tools to try to shape or change Chinese behavior. So, it remains to be seen how this relationship will evolve. But what's really interesting to note, though, is that both sides are on edge. Mr. Trump comes into the office with a mandate to actually do something to improve the lives of everyday Americans in our new globalized economy. But at the same time, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, Xi Jinping is also in his own very sensitive political transition year. So the Chinese have a very big leadership turnover that will happen later on this year, which means that he's not looking for a fight. He needs political and economic stability to be able to pull this off. But he also can't back down from a fight either. So that's the perspective in which you need to watch this relationship evolve. And it will evolve over the next, I'd say, 12 to 18 months.
Okay, well, one quick follow-up there. Xi Jinping was recently at Davos, which I hear was kind of a big deal. They've been trying to get him for many years, and this is the first time they did. Is that a coincidence that that's happening as Trump becomes president, or is there more of a geopolitical calculus happening with his attendance at the forum?
Oh, I think geopolitics has a lot to do with it, and it's really remarkable in that it marks the first time that a Chinese president has addressed the forum, and it marks a comfort level on the part of China and its leader taking a leadership role on the global stage. The fact that it happened at a time when you have a U.S. president coming into the White House who is more skeptical of multilateral engagement and global engagement than past U.S. presidents. And I think that sets us up for a very interesting geopolitical shift, or at least a conversation that we'll be having here in coming months.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Meredith. Appreciate that insight. And that does it for us here at the DuPont Circle headquarters of Eurasia Group. That's an area in D.C., for those not familiar. Keep watching over the coming weeks and months. We'll see how these predictions play out. And happy Inauguration Day weekend.